Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com, both free sites. Today is December the 14th, 2017. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, before I get into Lomachenko's big win, more beer for us, we'll talk about it. Let me just quickly congratulate Truax. Excellent performance, right? We'll talk about that fight in a different video if I'm James DeGale. Because of the styles involved, I'd be hesitant to exercise that rematch clause. Understand, DeGale is a big enough name where somebody else is going to give DeGale an opportunity. Right? In my opinion, you don't want to exercise a rematch clause and then fight a guy who now knows he could beat you, right? Whose style is one of the hardest for you to deal with, right? As an aside, let me just say, who would have thought that the way to fight Sergey Kovalev is the same way to fight James DeGale? Right? Somewhere, I'm sure, Andre Ward is tossing and turning, thinking about an opponent who he left on the table here. Right? Let me also congratulate a young guy who really impresses me. I mean, really impresses me. Now, I'm not saying this young guy is perfect. He's flat-footed. He gets hit. Right? He's not as defensively blessed as he thinks he is. But let me just say, punchers are born, they're not made. Right? You see a guy, if he can punch early in his career, he's a puncher. If he can't, I've rarely seen the fighter who can then suddenly get punching power later in his career. Anthony Yarde is a naturally born puncher, right? This guy, I'm sure, was knocking mom out the minute he came out the womb, right? I mean, just a heavy-handed guy, very impressive punching power. Let me point out, too, that, you know, really there are different levels of punching power. People are hipping me to this Dubois guy, who's a puncher, but Dubois needs a wind-up to punch. The really blessed punchers are the ones who can just throw these short chopping shots and knock you down. Anthony Yarde is one of those guys who can throw mind-blowingly hard short punches. Let me also say, too, that the way to get better in life is to test yourself. It's to know what skills you don't have and to develop those skills. So I always appreciate, and I mean always appreciate, fighters who I see trying things out in fights. In other words, the guy doesn't live off his fastball. You know, in the middle of a fight, the guy decides, hey, look, I need to learn some other things. I need to figure out this part of the game. Against this opponent here in this fight, I'm going to risk things a little bit here. And I'm going to try to do things differently, whether it's fight left-handed or whatever. Fight a different style. There's a moment in the Anthony Yarde fight where he decides, you know what? I'm going to trust my defense with my back up against the ropes. And here's a puncher. You know, this is like seeing Mike Tyson suddenly decide, you know, I'm going to go on my back foot here. And I'm going to try to keep my shoulder tucked, and I'm going to try to, you know, defend myself here for stretches of this fight. And Yarde pulls it off, right? Keep an eye on that young guy. Let me also say, too, that Yarde's interesting. Not much of an amateur career. He's older than you think, right? The guy's 26 years old. I'm just telling you, this guy is such a huge puncher. And he's so patient in the ring. In other words, You know, the defensive stretches I'm talking about here, he's forced on his back foot. Let's be real. But then on his back foot, he decides, hey, I'm going to stay here. Right? I'm just telling you that this guy has the patience, the calmness, the focus to really pull things off. We'll keep an eye on him. If I'm Adonis Stevenson, you know, some guy who's established, who's had the belt for a while, maybe I fight Yarde sooner rather than later, because the problem is, you let a guy like this continue to develop his skills, continue to become a monster, and if you fight him too late, that monster's going to come out and beat you. You want to fight these talented guys early in their career, before they fully figure things out. And I'm just telling you, Yarde is figuring things out quickly. Now let's talk about really a theory that I have that has paid off for me. The Lomachenko-Rigondeaux fight. Let me say, I put up a poll here on the community page of my YouTube website. I believe it's still up. And I sensed there was a lot of Rigondeaux sentiment out there, right? I knew it seemed to be an unreported story. Loma was going off as a reasonably big favorite, but you sensed that a lot of people weren't buying it. They thought that if Loma faced a defensive wizard, a guy who's a technician, even with a size disadvantage for his opponent, they felt that Rigondeaux would pull it off. So more than 40% of you in the poll, and I consider my subscribers to be among the most savvy when it comes to predicting fights, more than 40% of you thought Rigondeaux was going to win the fight outright. Right? Now, what happened? People here online know my call. The hedge I recommended was Lomachenko to win, hedged with the under 9.5 rounds at a plus 150. Folks, that was a casino mispricing. A plus 150. Because those of us who thought that Rigo was in over his head understood that Lomachenko had already made multiple guys quit in fights, that Loma was bigger, faster, the better athlete, as I say. Mainstream media won't use phrases like that. Better athlete, right? It almost sounds, politically incorrect. But let's just talk about freak athletes for a second. Because Loma's a freak athlete. Understand, freak athletes, for a 5-year stretch of their careers, are going to be close to unbeatable. Certainly. Against a guy like Rigondeaux, who's in his later 30s, who hasn't fought that much, who's low volume as it is, Lomachenko physically was just going to overwhelm him. And that's what happened. So let's talk about boxing, because in boxing in particular, freak athletes really do go through a sweet spot where, again, I'm not saying technically they're doing everything the right way. Right? I'm not saying Lomachenko is a better technician than Rigondeaux. But you should have seen this coming from 1,000 feet. In fact, let me back out of boxing for a little bit. And let's just talk about freak athletes versus great technicians in other sports. Right? Basketball. I cannot tell you how many times, and I'm serious about this, I've been out where millennials, people younger than me, come up to me and, say, hey, you tell me why Michael Jordan was better than LeBron. right? They're convinced that LeBron James is the best basketball player in history, right? People like Chris Broussard openly talk about how LeBron James wants to be the greatest of all time, right, in basketball. Right now, if you're from the 80s, and if you remember, in fact, hell, if you're from any era, and you just look at the film, you're going to understand that LeBron James is fundamentally a different player than Michael Jordan. Now, let me say, I'm in the Bay Area. Understand, you know, I watched Game 7 live, where LeBron James beats the Golden State Warriors. I've seen some incredible LeBron moments, right? LeBron running off a string of points years ago against the Detroit Pistons. The people in Cleveland know what I'm talking about. And pushing the Cavaliers, this is young LeBron, past the big bad Detroit Pistons in a playoff game, right? Deciding playoff game. LeBron's one of the best I've seen, but understand, a freak athlete is someone different than LeBron. When you watch LeBron's game, LeBron is like Jerry Rice. He's a master technician. So LeBron's out there and LeBron's doing things the right way, right? He's outside, he wants to get inside, he has back to the basket skills, he can play, you know, all 5 positions if he wants, he can block shots and stuff like that. But that's different than a freak athlete. Understand, a freak athlete doesn't necessarily have to have the technique down. A freak athlete is just physically more dominant than his opponent. This is while he's figuring out the game. So when you look at LeBron side by side with Michael Jordan, you immediately see that Jordan's a step faster. I mean, immediately see it. You understand that as good as LeBron is defensively, prime Jordan is practically Deion Sanders, another freak athlete. He's practically Deion Sanders on defense early, right? Understand, Jordan, one year, I think it's 87, 88 or something like that, double check me on the years, is the defensive MVP of the league. This is while he's a scoring champ of the league. Right? Now, you got the feeling that there were parts of Jordan's game that weren't there, right? Jordan really wasn't an accomplished three-point shooter. Right? But you understood that Jordan just physically could do things on the court other men just couldn't do. Quicker reflexes, much faster reflexes than LeBron James. Right? Different player. Let me name another freak athlete versus master technician. You know, Jerry Rice, master technician. Quarterbacks, more than one, Montana, Steve Young, they could close their eyes, right? Even Jeff Garcia could close their eyes and know where Jerry Rice was going to be on a route, right? I'm telling you, I watched a Jerry Rice era. Jerry Rice hardly ever dove for balls. He was that precise. But understand, Jerry wasn't the athlete that Randy Moss was. Moss is a freak athlete. Right? So when Randy Moss gets with Tom Brady, right, they're completely unstoppable. There are moments during their run where Brady's throwing in a triple coverage. I'm not kidding. And Randy Moss is out jumping the coverage. In other words, Moss has a vertical part of his game that Jerry couldn't have. Right? Moss, you know, Jerry couldn't just look at a DB and say, hey, I'm just going to run by you. That was Randy Moss. Right? Jerry's brilliance is in the planning and the understanding. Moss's brilliance is in the physical dominance. It's different. So in boxing, let's talk about the best heavyweight I ever saw. And he's physically dominant. for only one stretch of his career. Ali in the 1960s, right? The first Ali-Liston fight. As you're looking at the fight, you understand that Ali moves better than Liston. Right? One of my favorite rounds in boxing history is the first round of Ali-Liston. Ali hardly throws a punch, completely dominates Liston. His legs are so much better than Liston's that he's getting the spots before Liston's getting to the spot. Then he's pumping off a combination later in the fight, and then he moves away from spots. The fight's noteworthy because there's a stretch in that fight where many people believe Liston's corner started loading Liston's gloves up with a caustic liniment that gets in Ali's eyes. So Ali, in a heavyweight title fight, his first, starts yelling at his own corner to cut off the gloves because Ali felt that Liston was cheating. So here is Sonny Liston, the guy who destroys Floyd Patterson in the first round twice, right? The then reigning heavyweight champion. With a blind Ali, look at the film, folks, with a blind Ali up on the ropes, and Sonny Liston can't find him. Ali's reflexes are such that he's out of the way as Liston's throwing the punch. Right? Understand, Ali in the 60s has his legs. The legs are no longer there by the first Frazier fight after years in exile. But look at Ali, not just against Liston, but against Cleveland Williams. The Ali who beats Cleveland Williams, in my opinion, is the best heavyweight I've ever seen. And you'll notice he's so much faster than Cleveland Williams, who was viewed as a hellacious fighter at the time. Right? Hellacious fighter. Ali's so much faster than Cleveland Williams that Ali against a slugger is not even worried about getting hit. And this is an Ali who's not there to win by decision. He takes out Cleveland Williams early in the fight. Right? Freak athletes think that's the way life is. Right? Let's continue on the boxing vein. In the 1980s, the Leonard-Duran rematch. Ray Leonard figures out that he actually has better legs than Roberto Duran in the rematch. Right? Now keep in mind, Ray Leonard at that time used to come in the ring all dolled up. Right? The guy would wear the loud shorts. You know, the guy had tassels on his shoes. The guy would come in with a big robe. He had the entourage. He was so shaken by his first career loss to Duran that he comes in the ring wearing all black. This is before Tyson. Right? He only wanted one word on his trunks or his robe or something like that, according to legend. And that word was Leonard. Right? He wasn't Sugar Ray Leonard that night. Ray Leonard comes in serious. He wants to avenge his loss. As you look at the fight, Roberto Duran, now understand who Duran was. He's a guy who goes 15 rounds with Marvin Hagler, and Duran at the time wasn't even a middleweight. Right? You have a master boxer, in against a freak athlete who, let's be real here, doesn't have Duran's boxing skills. And it's a total mismatch. Duran can't find Ray. Ray is so much faster than Duran. Ray starts doing trick punches, right? Bolo punches and all that other stuff. Duran can't find him. Right? Leonard's not even at his best. Leonard's just too fast to be hit by a Hall of Famer. Right? Another fight. This is in the 90s. You have unbeaten James Toney, master technician, but not a great athlete. He's unbeaten, and he's fighting a guy who was the underdog in the fight. People thought that the underdog really had made a miscalculation fighting a master in James Toney so early in his career, and that underdog's Roy Jones. Folks, that fight's a near shutout, right? Jones didn't have Toney's boxing skills. Jones wasn't the counterpuncher James Toney was. But at that stretch of Jones's career, he was just too cat quick. He was just too fast. He could throw power shots with accuracy from distance and then get out of the pocket. Jones was such that Bernard Hopkins, after fighting him the first time, openly said that it would take a while for him to beat Roy Jones, because Jones at that time was just too fast, too much of a freak athlete. Well, wasn't that Lomachenko against Rigondeaux? Folks, understand, Lomachenko right now is a freak athlete, right? And he knows it. His footwork is off the page. If you go back and if you look at the Jason Sosa fight, just the footwork, you understood that there was no way Rigondeaux was going to beat Lomachenko. That Lomachenko, like Ray Leonard, would have had to have come out and fought the wrong fight, given up that level of footwork, right? Tried to stay in the pocket and allow Rigondeaux to counter him in some kind of effort to show he was more macho than Rigondeaux, for Rigondeaux to even have a prayer. Once Loma starts moving in the bout, once Loma starts flashing hand speed, which is much faster than Rigondeaux's hand speed, once Loma started showing you that, look, this guy can't contain me, you understood that Rigondeaux's only hope was to start to hold him. Right? Let me tell you what happens when you're fighting a freak athlete and you don't have a control on the situation. Fighters start quitting. Sonny Liston loses his heavyweight title on the stool against Ali. Claims he has a shoulder injury. Right? This is Big Bad Sonny Liston. Big Bad Sonny Liston, who was in some shootouts, the Cleveland Williams fight. Right? This Big Bad Sonny Liston, who Rocky Marciano did not come back from retirement to fight. He's so embarrassed against Ali that first fight that he gives up the heavyweight title between rounds. I'll give you a more recent example of a freak athlete who causes a fighter to quit, a Hall of Fame fighter to quit. Manny Pacquiao, who was in a zone where he was so fast that he was right in front of Oscar De La Hoya. A guy who apart from being in better health than I am right now with this cold, a guy who had gone 12 rounds with hellacious punchers like Sugar Shane Mosley, goes 12 rounds with him twice, right? Fernando Vargas, huge puncher, right? Oscar stops him. Ike Quartey. It's Oscar drilling Quartey late in that fight, right? Here's Oscar with a lot of experience against big punchers. Here's Oscar, a guy who, let's remember this now, loses a split decision to Floyd Mayweather, an unbeaten prime Mayweather. One of the judges thought Oscar won that fight. And here he is against Manny Pacquiao, didn't have the reflexes or the athleticism at that stage of his career to compete. Right? That fight's so bad that Freddie Roach is caught on camera telling the smaller Pacquiao, who was moving up 2 weight classes, You need to close the show here. Take him out this round, right? Oscar wisely decides across the ring, not knowing what's going on, to lose that fight in which he was favored on the stool, right? Roberto Duran, Ray Leonard, the rematch, Duran loses it on a stool. James Toney would never quit, you know that. But let's just say you knew by the fourth round that James Toney was headed for his first loss against Roy Jones, right? What does it all mean? It means that Rigondeaux's technical brilliance went out the window. Just like Sonny Liston's technical brilliance went out the window. Liston, by the way, one of the best jabs in heavyweight history. Right? Go back and review that Liston jab. He's the guy who taught George Foreman his jab. Food for thought. Guys used to train together. Tony's technical brilliance, and keep in mind, Tony's a guy who destroyed Evander Holyfield. Just food for thought. You want a masterpiece fight? Look at that fight. He destroys Evander Holyfield. You could not beat Prime Tony from the inside out. Right? But a freak athlete from the outside could destroy James Toney. It's like fast break basketball destroying half-court basketball. So Loma right now is in that zone where he's not the best puncher. At times he looks a little bit reckless. Understand, he's a guy who shifts frequently from southpaw to righty and back. Right? At times he looks frantic. His footwork is that far ahead of the crowd's. But unless he ventures outside of his weight class, and there are tough fights out there, I personally think Jorge Linares gives him all he can handle if he ventures to Linares' weight class. But no technician type guy who's an inferior athlete is going to beat Loma for the next, I'd say, 2 to 3 years. He's that much of a freak athlete above the rest of the field. But understand how it ends for freak athletes. Because they're not master technicians, because they're not complete, because they're relying on physical dominance over technical brilliance, what happens is when an Ali loses his legs, right, suddenly he's in trouble, unable to stop a hard-charging Joe Frazier from getting inside and roughing him up. Understand, Ali hardly threw body punches. Think about that. World-class heavyweight hardly throwing body punches. I know the Vladimir Klitschko fans are saying, yeah, we know of one. Let me just say this. In the 70s, people forget, Ali loses to Ken Norton. Right? Ali has to rope-a-dope George Foreman. The Ali of the 70s would have treated George Foreman like he treated Cleveland Williams. Ali would have been the hunter. I know that's hard to believe, but the Ali of the 60s, the guy who's calling rounds and then delivering against Ernie Terrell, against Zora Fali, right? That Ali destroys 1970s Ali, right? Understand, Ray Leonard hardly fights the second half of the 80s, right? He's out of the ring for 3 years before he comes back and beats Marvin Hagler. Then he's in a shootout. People forget this. Ray Leonard wins the light heavyweight title. He's in a shootout in that match against Donnie Lalonde. Lalonde catches him, drops him. Then Ray has some unfortunate fights. He tries to fight terrible Terry Norris, Boxing Hall of Famer. Ray gets embarrassed in that fight. You understood at that point in Ray's career, he was no longer the dominant athlete. He was no longer the 4'3", 40 guy. Right? Roy Jones gains weight, wins the heavyweight title. Never the same fighter since then. You start to notice other guys are getting close to him and stopping him. Antonio Tarver, Glenn Johnson, Danny Green. You start to notice that if you can get close to Roy, let's just say Roy's not Roberto Duran up close. He's not James Toney up close. The hardcore technicians, that's you, Bernard Hopkins, make comebacks late in their careers because they have the skills and they've learned to work in a world where you don't need a 98-mile-per-hour fastball. The freak athlete guys need that 98-mile-an-hour fastball. Once they lose that top-end velocity, they're not the same fighter. So let's enjoy Lomachenko while we have the opportunity to. Loma knows who he is, but he's already, 29 years old? He's already in his later 20s, right? Loma works out religiously. Hardcore athlete is keeping himself in peak condition. But let me just say, there's going to be a day when you look at Loma and you start to realize that the guy's footwork isn't as off the page as it is right now, where his reflexes dim just a little bit. When that day hits, he won't be the same fighter that he is today. Loma at 37, in my opinion, won't be Rigondeaux at 37. Right? But just understand, because Loma's a freak athlete, Rigondeaux at 37 doesn't have a shot against prime Loma. So more than 40% of you thought Rigondeaux was going to win that fight. Didn't happen. Right? The under, you won on both sides of the hedge. Right? Loma won the fight. Great. The under, 9.5 rounds, made you a big winner on the night because that returned better than even money. That returned a plus 150. Right? If these two guys fought 5 times, Loma would win all 5. Styles make fights. If you're a master technician who's not a great athlete, and you're inactive and older, in my opinion, you have no shot against the freak athletes. Rigondeaux joins Liston, Duran, James Toney as great technicians, completely overwhelmed by freak athletes. Right? Freak athletes are few and far between. But when you encounter one, recognize it. So if Carl Lewis, master technician, right, very few holes in his game, were to race prime Usain Bolt in the 100, Usain Bolt, slow out the blocks. We know that. Take Usain Bolt. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.